Hey everyone, this is Jason Probst, that guy in Hutch, and you're listening to That Podcast in Hutch. Today I have with me Denice Gilliland. She's the Community Impact Coordinator for the United Way of Reno County. And before that, she worked with Big Brothers Big Sisters, so a lot of you in town have probably known her or had some conversations with her. But I want to tell you why I invited her in today. A few weeks ago, I went to a K-Ready meeting, which is a coalition of people in the county who are working to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that children are prepared and ready for kindergarten. And in that meeting, Denice ran through a budget that she had worked up at one point in her life, and it was really striking to me, and it stuck with me. So after that, I asked her if she'd come on. And before I have her come in, I really just want to go through this budget with you, and then we can talk about this. So what Denice told us at this meeting was that at the time she had left her relationship, left her husband. It was a bad situation, and she had 3 children. She made $38,000 a year, and her monthly salary was roughly $3,167. And then from there, she broke down every expense that she had. She said she paid $816 in taxes and insurance premiums. That left her $2,351 to provide for everything else her family needed. She had a large expense. The largest expense in her household was childcare, and that was $1,100 a month, and that ended up being over 30% of her net income. And she also gave a statistic that according to Child Care Aware, that number, the target should be about 7% of a family's income. After paying those expenses, she was left with $1,251 to pay for everything else. She had a house payment that was $350, which in Hutchinson is really, really affordable, much cheaper than what market rent is. That left her with $901. She had a car payment that was $350. Again, that's probably right in the range that people pay for a car. That left her with $551. She had to pay for gas to get back and forth to work. She said that usually came to about $100 a month. She's now down to $451. She needed full coverage insurance for her car because she still had a note on it. And any of us who've borrowed money for a car know that's a requirement you can't get out of. That's $100. So now she's down to $351. She realized that the water bill is one bill you can't skate on. You have to pay that. The city's pretty strict about that. And so she paid that each month, and that was about $60. So she's down to $291. She had a child that needed diapers, and at a minimum, that was about $80 a month. So she's now at $211. Now comes the utilities. She's paying gas and electric. Of course, those vary based on the season and the temperatures, but she paid about $250 a month for those, which I would say is a pretty average amount. At this point in her budget, she's $39 in the hole, and she hasn't bought food. She doesn't have cable. She doesn't have a phone listed on here because the company she worked for paid for her phone. So when I heard this, I was really kind of struck by this because we have these conversations. We know this anecdotally that this is what people live with. It's their reality, but I had never seen it quite broken down in such detail. So I want to turn it over to Denice now, and just, can you talk to me about this situation and kind of what your life was like during this period of time?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting point in my life because I had never had to live like this before. The first thing I realized is I didn't have to pay my utility bills between October and about March. So I didn't. And that was the only way my kids would get Christmas.
And that's because of the cold weather rule that prevents them from turning off your utilities.
Correct. The other thing that we did is we ate dinner with my parents several times a week because a lot of weeks I just couldn't juggle buying groceries for the kids and myself. Unfortunately, the job that I worked at, being able to get away to go to a food pantry or something like that was nearly impossible. I worked 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. I rarely got a lunch. That was just one of the realities in that industry. And those places are generally open 8 to 5. So I couldn't utilize some of those resources. I made a little bit too much to qualify for DCF assistance with childcare, having 2 kids in childcare, and I made too much to get any help with insurance. I will tell you the only negative thing on my credit report is all bills that were created in this time of life at the hospital or the clinic, because I didn't have enough money to pay those bills at the end of the month.
Medical debt.
Yeah, medical debt.
So you talked about income, and that was another interesting point that you had raised. You, at the time this budget was drawn up, this was based on $38,000 a year income. And because of what's come to be known as the cliff effect, where somebody makes enough money that they don't qualify for any assistance to help them in life with these kind of expenses, you actually ended up taking a different job that paid less so that you could make a better financial decision for your family, and get some assistance to help you guys make it a little better. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I did everything that you just described for about a year. And I realized that there had to be a better way where I wasn't constantly running in the negative. So I did a little bit of research, found out if I could find a job making about $35,000 a year, I would qualify for medical assistance through CanCare, and I would also qualify for daycare assistance. So that's what I did, is I started looking for a new job, found something, and from there, we were much better off. I had money left over at the end of each week after payday. I didn't have to worry about what if one of the kids gets sick. And that was a really difficult decision for me to make, because I knew long term I was going to be capping my income potential.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point. You were on track to, your income was growing, and but it stalled, and you're stuck at this income level, and you're dealing with these expenses, and just for whatever was best for your family, you had to make this decision to either, keep going along this way, continue to not have enough money, or to make a decision that would positively affect your family and help you in the moment, knowing that, you might get past that point at sometime later.
Yeah. My youngest child was 6 weeks old when I went through a divorce. I knew that I was going to be in this situation for at least 4 years, because I was going to have to pay for childcare. So I just couldn't justify being in that situation for 4 years.
So you, knowing that, and that's in the 4 years is until they enter school, and then you have a little more flexibility, kind of with your schedule on that. And the childcare was $1,100 a month. That was for 2 children?
That was for 2 children in full-time childcare.
Okay, so in this, well, I want to talk about your experience a little bit more, and then move into kind of the broader community on this. You also mentioned some of the, like, you can go along with a budget like this, but it doesn't have any flexibility. And if there's any unexpected expenses, like car repair, home repair, water heater goes out, plumbing springs a leak, those things kind of really take this very tight budget that's already kind of impossible and throw it into complete chaos, right?
Yeah. You literally feel helpless when something like that happens. So for me, we were already in a really tight budget situation, and I had a vehicle that was completely paid off. It was a great vehicle. I could have probably got another 3 to 4 years out of it if I took care of it. And it was totaled in a car accident. And when that happened, I didn't have a whole lot in savings. I was in the middle of a divorce. I didn't have a whole lot left over to begin with. And when that happened and I had to start paying a car payment and full coverage insurance, it was insanity trying to make ends meet every single month. And then, little things would go wrong with the house. I had to call a plumber one time. The pipes had backed up. Mm-hmm. So that was $100 or $150. And you just didn't have anything extra to help make ends meet.
How does that feel when that happens? I think one thing in this, people just don't understand how demoralizing that is.
You feel absolutely helpless. You feel helpless if you have to go ask for help. In my case, even asking my parents for help, and they were always willing to help me. They knew how hard I was working. But you just feel like such a failure, and you feel like, gosh, I'm 30 years old. I should be able to make it on my own. It's hard to describe the hopelessness that you feel when you're in that situation.
And I think, my conversations I've had with people and, have experienced similar realities. It's also just a time after time after time, right? Like you might be able to overcome one car wreck. You might be able to overcome one big home repair, but they don't stop. They just come one after another after another. We know, the research kind of shows us that a large percentage of families don't have $400 available to get them through an emergency. There's a lot of families in that situation. And so every time this happens, they're trying to rob Peter to pay Paul. They might get a payday loan. It's just kind of a cycle that people get stuck in, right?
It is. And it feels like you're spinning your wheels and you're never able to get ahead because there's just not enough money.
Did you ever have a moment where you just kind of wanted to just sit down and give up?
There were multiple moments like that. There was more than one. The first one was probably when the car accident happened. There was another moment. My oldest daughter has asthma. She needed an inhaler and it was like $180. Even with my insurance, when I finally called the doctor, I said, I can't get her this. They had a sample, so they were able to at least help in that aspect. But anything extra, anything that comes along that's unexpected, it just makes you feel helpless.
And you probably wanted to do some fun or extracurricular things for your kids too. That probably wasn't really in the cards very often either, was it?
No, that wasn't in the cards at all. If we did anything like that, it was because my parents provided for us to do that.
So since that time, you've entered nonprofit work and you've spent the last years kind of working to help the community. So from your perspective now, but like knowing that you have this personal experience, but now working on the policy end of things and trying to make sure that other families are supported in the community and make sure that kids are prepared to learn and can thrive. How do you see this playing out in the community, or what are some examples you see of your situation more broadly in the community?
So it was really interesting when I managed the Rally Reno funds several months ago. What I noticed was the families that we were helping, most of them were families exactly like I was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that one thing. It was somebody got sick. It was somebody got laid off. And they had never been in a position where they had to ask for help before because they always just managed to figure it out. And I was so frustrated because for me, it was like, we can help these people all day long. But in 3 months, if something doesn't change, they're going to be in the exact same situation. And that's when we really started having the conversation about the cliff effect and how that affects families, how it affects children. We want kids to come to school ready to learn. We have to provide an environment for them to be able to do that.
Now, the Rally Reno funds that was a collaboration between the United Way, the Chamber, and the Community Foundation, right?
Correct.
And that was a really unique program. I'll make sure everybody understands this. At the early stages of the pandemic, there was this brilliant plan put together that said, we'll sell gift cards to people, that will help businesses that can't operate, or at least can't operate at the same capacity. We'll raise money for them through selling gift cards. That money will be routed to the Community Foundation, and it will be matched by a donor. And then that money will be used to help people in crisis because they've lost their job or otherwise are suffering some income loss. And that was a really effective program during that time, both for businesses and for people in our community.
It was. We've had businesses tell us that was the only source of income that they had coming in. And then we've had families tell us we wouldn't have made it without the help through the Rally Reno funds.
Now, did you find during that period, during the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic and kind of managing, those funds, did you find that there were a lot of people just in the middle class, but barely?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say the majority of the families that we helped out, that is exactly where they were. They were in the middle class, but just barely.
And like you had mentioned earlier, it just takes one crisis or one layoff or one big medical bill to kind of throw you over the edge where you're not thriving, you're not comfortable, you're actually drowning. And that then has kind of coming back to what we were talking about with children, that creates chaos in a family environment, right? When everyone's stressed out about money and then the kids aren't as prepared to learn and they're not as open to learning because they have unmet needs potentially in this stress environment at home. So that's kind of what we're doing with the K-Ready group, right? Is to talk about how can we support families? How do we make sure kids are ready to enter school and learn at their best?
Yeah. So our K-Ready group, that's really what we talk about is how do we help families make sure that their kids come to school ready to learn? It started off with gathering our school districts up, and they came up with a checklist of all of the things that we felt needed to be done before they entered kindergarten to be successful in school. As we have progressed throughout the last 8 years, we have really started talking about childcare and having high quality childcare in our community and affordable childcare in our community.
Now that's come to be a big issue statewide and nationwide, actually. And we're finding now that we have two problems with childcare. We have a supply issue that we don't have enough childcare providers in the community. I'm going to reframe that and say we actually have three problems. The business model for childcare providers isn't really robust. People aren't making a lot of money, and it's not really sustainable, which is why we don't have a lot of people doing it. And the third is that it's expensive, even though all those other elements exist. If you have two children at the same time in daycare, it's prohibitively expensive. And as it relates to workforce, we're finding that people are opting to stay out of the workforce because the net pay that they get after paying for childcare is not making it worthwhile.
Correct. So, the first problem with availability is our childcare workers in childcare centers, they make minimum wage. Mm-hmm. They have no benefits. And most of the time they're very young people that are just starting their own families or they're in college, but they make minimum wage. You can go to McDonald's or you can go to Spangles and make $10 or $12 an hour, which is $2 or $3 more an hour than you're going to make working at a childcare center. And it's hard work.
And highly regulated.
Yeah. Every little thing that you do in a childcare center or when you're taking care of children is regulated. So it's a tough gig. Just to be blunt, it's a tough gig to be a childcare provider.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, knowing what we now know about early childhood brain development, that 0 to 3 window is the most critical time in a child's life, right?
Absolutely. Their little brains are just like sponges and they're learning everything and absorbing everything. It's where their language skills are being developed the most. We want our kids to be good communicators. And so it would benefit us to make sure that our children are being taken care of by people who are highly trained to do so.
But as long as we're going to have that high level of training requirement, but the pay is still low, that's going to there's a gap there that we have that's a barrier to solving the problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in our community, we've tried some things to improve this environment, right? We've tried some things to increase the access to childcare. Is there anything out there that you've seen that is really effective or that our community might, or even the state might want to take a look at?
So there are different models that other states are utilizing. The way that our regulations are written currently, we can't do anything other than explore those and maybe look at ways that we could utilize those models in the future. But ultimately, our model is broken the way that we fund childcare. When a child is little, the ratio is 3-1. So you can have 3 kids to every 1 provider. The typical infant room in Reno County at a childcare center, you have 9 infants in a room. The last breakdown that I heard is that it cost about $250 per week per infant to take care of that child. On average, our centers charge about $150 a week. So automatically that room has already lost almost $1,000 a week.
Yeah. And yes, so they're losing money by caring for infants, yet that's a critical need that people have. I mean, if you have a baby and you're ready to go back into the workforce, you're needing that infant spot. But the cost, I remember years ago when my children were small, the cost for an infant's much more than, say, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, right?
So your 3, 4, and 5-year-olds are where a center would make their money.
Okay.
However, that is where we have free preschool available, and parents pull their kids out of childcare to go to a preschool. So really, we have this age group between birth and 3 that's not a sustainable model.
Yeah. So we have some work to do all over the place to try to fix that a little bit, don't we?
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier the cliff effect, and I know that we've been involved in meetings that have talked about the cliff effect. But can you explain to people what we talked about it a little bit earlier in your experience, but explain kind of in policy terms what the cliff effect is?
So what the cliff effect is it's where you are making enough money to get by, but not well. So essentially, you do not qualify for any help through any of the social services, through DCF or anything like that. But by the time you pay all of your bills, you have absolutely nothing left, or you might be like $39 negative, like I was.
Yeah. And eating dinner with your parents because you can swing that.
Yeah.
That's affordable.
Yeah.
So I know that we had MIT come in. There was MIT students that came in and did an analysis of the cliff effect. And I'm trying to remember some of what that conversation was, but they looked at it specifically in Reno County. And what were some of the things they uncovered from that research?
So the MIT team recommended that we partner with the Good Jobs Institute. That is one of MIT's premier programs that they have, that they offer to communities. And then they also recommended that we engage businesses in the Good Jobs strategy. And some of their work really talks about when you get someone stable, that you tier them out of DCF services instead of just having this dramatic cutoff.
Yeah, they talk about that offboarding, and when I talk to people about this, I say we have a cliff, and what we should have is a ramp, and we're not doing a very good job of that.
Exactly.
And so this is what leads exactly to what we were talking about earlier with you, where people in that situation they just continue to struggle, or they make a sound financial decision, which in some cases means working less or taking a lower paying job so that they can actually increase their overall income, which of course, like you mentioned earlier, you've limited, that reduces long-term earning capacity. It reduces revenue to the city, the county, the state government over time. It's intuitive to think that we don't want people doing that, yet we have a system that's encouraging that. Is that fair to say?
I believe that's fair to say.
And the other thing I know they talked about in there is wages, and I don't want to get into a big discussion about, what wages might be, but you had mentioned earlier that the wage ecosystem in our community is really right at that threshold. It's just not quite enough to push people over and past that cliff. They're kind of hovering right on the edge with 1 foot over in the air and 1 foot on solid ground.
Yeah.
So what would it mean to our community, though, or what sort of problems do you see in our community that might be improved if we took some of those suggestions and tried to address some of these problems with the cliff effect?
I think one thing that we would see is the potential for increased revenue coming into the city and the county, potentially even the state, depending on what we did. And I think another thing that we could potentially see is just a better quality of life for people that live here in Reno County. It's kind of hard to draw a line and say, if we did this, this would happen, because we don't really know. It would be a bit of an experiment.
Sure. But as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, it seems that one byproduct would be that people might be happier.
Yeah.
And happier people tend to engage in their community more, and they are raising happier children, and there's just a better sense in the community of, this is a place where I want to be. I am making my home and my life here, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, a sense of community pride.
Yeah. I think it's hard to, like you said, it's hard to say this is the one thing that will fix it, because it's a multifaceted problem, and we want to try, different things to improve the environment. But also there's a lot of benefits that come out of that. And some of them are dollars and cents. Some of them are a little less tangible than that, but they still result ultimately in dollars and cents, because if people are struggling all the time right on the edge of that cliff and they're not happy, there's a cost to that, just like there's a benefit to helping them get past that hump, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and some of the things that we know that when people are happier, they have better health outcomes. They might not suffer from mental health issues. Substance use disorders might be a lower instance. So there is a lot of things that we could potentially see by addressing these issues.
Yeah. And it seems in this term, particularly in the cliff effect, it's not a huge investment, right? It's more of an adjustment to current systems and current rules that would say, okay, instead of doing this, we're going to make an adjustment, do that. And we could test that for a while and see if what we suspect will happen happens.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing that a little bit with DCF. July 1st, they actually raised the threshold for receiving childcare benefits to 250% of poverty. For a middle-class family, that could be a game changer to being able to receive just a little bit of help with that childcare bill.
But that, if my understanding and my memory is right on this, we haven't updated that number for a long, long time. The poverty levels remained static for about 40 years, if I remember right. And I couldn't help but thinking when you said that, is that's far lower than what you were making with your family of four. You're making $38,000 with your family of four and struggled. So
Yeah.
how is anybody supposed to make it on $26,000 a year with four members in their family?
It would be really, really difficult.
So let's say that you have a day where you can do anything you want. There's a magic wand put in your hand, and you can say these things will happen, and I think these are the things that will make life better for people. These are the things that will improve families and improve children's lives in our community. What are the things that you do?
The first thing I would do is make sure everybody had the opportunity to work in a job, position, industry that they wanted to, and that they were able to make a fair wage at. That would be the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is make sure that all kids had fair and equitable access to childcare, education. And I feel like that would be a really good start and would be just enough to disrupt our system in a good way.
Because those two things really, those are kind of ground level concerns that families face every day. And if we address those, we're setting things up for a better position later on.
Yeah.
I feel often, and I'll be curious to hear if you feel this way too. I sometimes feel that we're pretty short-sighted in the decisions that we make as policy at the policy level, because a lot of these things we know about childcare now, and there's tons of research about this. You can make that investment today in these, 0 to 3-year-olds, 3-year-old, 4-year-old preschool, and throughout education, but particularly on the early end, we know that we make those investments. We're saving money and resources on the back end, and those kids grow up better adjusted with less social emotional problems, less interaction with the criminal system. They're more productive, they're higher earnings, they're contributing more to overall society. So it always baffles me a little bit that we don't look at the long-term effects of that.
I think a lot of our policies are made in good spirit and with the understanding that we're doing the right thing. I think what we sometimes lack is people who the policies will affect negatively, bringing them to the table and talking to them about how certain things affect them.
Mm-hmm.
And when policies are made and without that lens of equity, somebody always ends up getting hurt.
Mm-hmm. So when we exclude people from the conversation, we're not really getting the full picture of what the needs are and what the potential solutions might be. Is that right?
Exactly.
So here you are. What year was this situation that you outlined in your budget?
So this was in 2014, 2015.
Okay. So not terribly long ago, but a little while ago. So talk about your life now. You're more stable now, I imagine. You're working with United Way, and I can tell you enjoy that work quite a bit.
Do.
And so when you look back on this time, I guess kind of what are your thoughts about, like, this is the situation I was in, and now my kids are older and we're a little more, we have our feet underneath us a little bit. What do you think, or what do you see when you reflect back on that time?
So what I see when I reflect back on that time is just a lot of chaos in my life. It's kind of painful to go back and reflect on that, just because the things that had taken place that led up to my divorce. I've went on, I've remarried. My kids are incredibly well adjusted. My oldest child is out of the home now. There's a huge age gap between my oldest and my younger two. So my life is just much calmer. My employer is supportive of the work that I do. My employer is supportive of family, which makes a huge difference. If I need to take time off to take one of my kids to the doctor, I can, and I'm not penalized for it. So just in general, I am a much happier person, but my family is in a better position as well.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, as you were answering that, do you ever look back and see the ways in which this all could have gone completely differently?
Absolutely. Frequently. And there are a lot of ways this could have gone differently for me. First of all, substance misuse runs rampant in my family. I could have went that direction. I could have completely given up because this was a hard time. I was depressed. I was, not only was I suffering from postpartum depression, I was just suffering from depression in general, because this was just such a hard situation. So there are so many ways that this could have turned out differently. I am so thankful I had the support system that I had through my family, because I don't think it would have turned out the same way had I not had that.
Yeah. And that's an important point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I hadn't thought of that before. Not everyone has that support system. A lot of people are doing this exact struggle alone. Yeah. And we know too that these support systems make all the difference, but not everyone has them.
Yeah, support systems make all of the difference in the world. And I can honestly say that's why my situation has turned around and ended like it has, because I had that support and I had people that, I could go eat dinner with when I couldn't afford food, because I was lucky enough that my parents were still in the community that I was raised in.
Yeah. And for the people that don't, they don't know who to reach out to often, and they're struggling on their own.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I am so thankful that you were willing to share this story with me. And I was so thankful that you told it at the meeting, which then piqued my interest and wanted me to sit down and talk with you about it more. And I'm glad that you're willing to share that with the people that listen to my podcast. And I hope that it'll make listeners think a little bit about some of these issues and some of the things that people go through that maybe we don't have a real way to connect with except through experiences like yours. So thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Hey everyone, there are a lot of fun events going on this weekend, and I'm going to highlight just a few of them here. But if you want to see a full list of everything going on, I would recommend going to visithutch.com. They have a pretty good list of everything going on. But a couple that I want to highlight. This weekend, the Hutchinson Recreation Commission and Family Community Theater will present the Spook Walk at Dillon Nature Center. I don't know if you've been to this before or not. I have been, and it's a super fun event, and it's really got just the right amount of spookiness for kids 12 and under. Tours for this will begin every 30 minutes, starting at 5:30 p.m. on both October 15th and October 16th. Tickets are only $5. You want to buy them in advance at hutchrec.com. On October 14th, the Hutchinson Art Center will host Empty Bowls, raising hunger awareness through art. This event is a Hutchinson High School fundraiser to fight hunger in our community, and for a $10 donation, you'll land a handcrafted bowl made by a local artist or student, and you'll also get a separate bowl of food that's provided by Val's Berry Bowl and the Traveling Bowl. There's also going to be a silent auction, and this event will start at 5 p.m. at the Hutchinson Arts Center. On Friday, October 15th, Hutchinson's Historic Fox Theater will present the New Orleans-based Rebirth Brass Band. This group has been a staple in the French Quarter and has performed for audiences all over the world. It's rooted in the tradition of brass bands, but they also combine funk and hip-hop to create their signature sound. This show begins at 8 p.m., and if you want more ticket information, go to hutchinsonfox.com. As always, if you have an event you'd like to promote, reach out and let me know. I love letting people know about all the exciting things happening in Hutchinson. We're having a lot of fun doing this podcast, and every week I'm just excited with the people that I get to visit with. And I hope you're enjoying it too. And if you are, it's really important that we get more people to listen to this podcast to make it sustainable. As much as I like doing it, it's going to be hard to keep going if we don't have as many listeners as we'd like. There are some simple things you can do. If you like it, first off, tell your friends about it. Make sure you share it with people. Talk to them. Say you got to listen to this and you'll find it interesting, and get the word out about it. Another thing you can always do is like it, subscribe, and rate it on your player like iTunes or Spotify. Just anything you can do to kind of indicate to other people that this is something worth listening to. Another thing you can do is subscribe to my newsletter, which is thatguyandhutch.substack.com. There's a free option, but there's a paid option on there. When you subscribe on the paid option, you're helping both my newsletter and the podcast continue. Anything you can do to help on this end to make sure we spread this out, get more people listening, we'd really appreciate it, because I want to keep doing it. I want to keep bringing interesting people from our community and our state in for you to visit with. I'd like to thank a few of the people who've helped make That Podcast in Hutch possible. My son Mitchell Probst wrote and recorded the music for the show. Jenny Brigette put together some great graphics and promotional art. And Chris Acker helps overcome my mistakes to produce a great sounding product every episode. That Podcast in Hutch is made possible through a collaboration between the Hutchinson Arts and Culture Collective and Salt City Sound. They're working to bring resources and infrastructure to support art, music, and storytelling in our community. If you have an idea for your own podcast, reach out to them at podcasts@saltcitysound.net. If you enjoy That Podcast in Hutch, be sure to subscribe and share it with all your friends. You can also help support this production by subscribing to thatguyandhutch.substack.com or by emailing me at thatguyandhutch@gmail.com to learn about sponsorship opportunities. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week.
A Salt City Sound production.